Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to ESG Talks, a KBRA podcast series focusing on environmental, social, and governance, ESG. This podcast series highlights various ESG hot topics and includes commentary from prominent voices within the ESG community. In this episode of ESG Talks, Pat Welch, KBRA's Chief ESG and Ratings Policy Officer, interviews Bill Curry, President and CEO of the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, BIOS, Peter Schlosser, Vice President and Vice Provost of the Julie Ann Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University, ASU, and Kenro Kusumi, Dean of Natural Sciences at ASU. In October 2021, BIOS and ASU announced a strategic partnership to elevate awareness around the critical role that the ocean plays in climate mitigation. Pat, Bill, Peter, and Kenro discuss the research that BIOS and ASU do to explore the world's oceans and address the global and environmental challenges we face as climate change grows more extreme.
Thank you all for joining. I'd like to start, Bill, with you and maybe a brief introduction to BIOS. Can you tell us why BIOS was founded and what is the organization's mission? And then also after that, can you talk a little bit about why the oceans are so important to understanding the world's climate issues?
Well, hi, Pat. I'm Bill Curry. I'm the President and CEO of Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences. Our mission is to research the ocean's functions in the Earth system and also to provide educational support for the ocean processes to students at multiple levels like K through 12 and undergraduate and graduate school level. BIOS has been part of Bermuda in one form or another since the early 1900s. It's originally set up as a visiting location for scientists from the US, Harvard University and NYU, to come for seasonal work studying marine biology. At the time, it was only about 45 years since Darwin had published Origin of the Species by Natural Selection. And many scientists were still testing those theories. And islands were particularly interesting because of their remoteness and separation of the populations of organisms, provided some interesting tests about how natural selection proceeded. Of course, the oceans became much more important for other reasons following World War I, after submarines became an important weapon during that war. And many of the major countries of the world realized that they didn't know a whole lot about what was going on in the oceans. And in the 1920s, the US made a substantial effort to increase its research efforts in ocean sciences. And as a result of that, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on Cape Cod was formed, and so was Bermuda Biological Station for Research, which is the prior name for BIOS. Since about 1930, we've been in St. George's continuously, mostly seasonal work until maybe the 60s and 70s, at which time year-round activities became more important. And what we're most known for is the fact that we had been studying the oceans for a long time, and we had the longest records on the planet of changes in the ocean, its temperature changes, its salinity changes, its changes in its chemistry, changes in the organisms, and play a big role in the understanding of how rising CO2 in the atmosphere is affecting ocean climate and ocean organisms and ecosystems. The ocean is a major part of the climate system. The Earth's atmosphere is heated from below. 70% of the below part is the oceans itself. And so what goes on in the ocean, to a great extent, sets up the circulation patterns in the atmosphere. And the ocean is also absorbing a large fraction of the added heat gain caused by rising CO2. Somewhere above 90% of the total heat gain on the planet has actually been mixed into the oceans. And the other aspect of the oceans that's really important is that about a third or so of the annual fossil fuel burning and other CO2 inputs into the atmosphere that humans do is absorbed naturally by the oceans currently. And so it's a major sink for rising CO2, and understanding that is really going to be important going forward to try to mitigate the rising CO2 and maybe even draw it down through enhanced ocean carbon removal processes.
Fascinating. Let's dive a little deeper, Bill. What are some recent initiatives and research that BIOS has been working on?
So since the 1954, and again, beginning with another program in about the 80s, early 80s, we've been using ships to go out to the North Atlantic, about 30 to 50 kilometers southeast of Bermuda, to study the ocean and how it's changing. The biggest change in ocean sciences that's going on right now in terms of the process of observing the oceans is that much of that type of work is becoming done by autonomous robotic systems. And that's been one of the things that's changed at BIOS, is that we've brought in a small fleet of underwater gliders that are capable of spending continuous 3 to 6 month periods in the oceans, going up and down the upper 1 kilometer of the water column. And currently, there are about 4,000 robots in the oceans that are coming to the surface about every 10 days and providing a look at the temperature and the salinity and dissolved oxygen and other parameters globally. And these are playing a major role in predictions of hurricane intensity, for instance, because you're able to know with certainty how much heat is in the upper water column, heat that is what fuels the hurricane's intensities. There are other systems like our autonomous gliders, which we can actually tell them where to go and what to measure while they're there. And so there's a new interaction between robots in the oceans and scientists on shore to do real-time experimentation for various things. So that's really a very, very big change. The other thing that I think, at least at BIOS, is a big new effort is that the economics of gene sequencing have changed to such an extent that genomics is playing a huge role in our understanding of the functioning of organisms and ecosystems now. And that seems to me to be one of the major future efforts that's going forward, is changes in how we go about studying the ocean's organisms and their interactions.
Thank you, Bill. Peter and Kenro, can you speak about how the partnership between Arizona State University and BIOS developed and why it'll be crucial in furthering the mission of preserving global ocean health and mitigating the effects of climate change?
Hi, Pat. I'm Peter Schlosser. I'm Vice President and Vice Provost of Global Futures at Arizona State University, and I'm directing the Global Futures Laboratory, the Julie Ann Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory, that is. So what our main mission is to study the world, the changing world, rapidly changing world that we are living in, and to project how these changes might translate into the future. How might future worlds actually look like? If you take that as a starting point, and if you keep in mind that, as Bill already mentioned, about 70% of the surface of the planet is covered by the oceans, it is absolutely clear that if we want to understand the future of the world, we have to understand the future of the oceans. So understanding that and realizing that at Arizona State University, we had capacity in ocean research, but just a small capacity, and a bit fragmented over different schools and colleges in the university, we knew that we had to build much more capacity on the ocean side. After all, we are living on the water planet. And so we either could have embarked on an effort to do that by ourselves, or to partner with an institution that is actually known for their work in the ocean or on the oceans. So when the opportunity came along that BIOS was looking for a partner in academia, we, of course, were immediately interested, started conversations, and thankfully they led to a successful outcome, meaning that we are now in a very close partnership with BIOS. That now gives us the capability to research the present state of the planet as a whole, within that the important role that the oceans play, as Bill already explained. But it also gives us the opportunity to teach, to educate our students in a way that is inclusive of all the pieces of the Earth system, of the world in which they will live. And so that, in essence, got us from the recognition that we cannot fulfill our mission and vision without having a strong presence in the oceans, to a partnership that now is thriving and is taking off with BIOS as a well-known entity in ocean sciences, with geographic location in the Atlantic, in the middle of the ocean. So that balances out our quote-unquote deficit of living in the desert. But with that partnership, we actually have access for our students, for our researchers to the ocean in a very direct way.
That's great. Kenro, do you have anything to add?
Hi, Kenro Kusumi here. I'm Dean of Natural Sciences at Arizona State University. This is a great partnership opportunity to team up on areas of strength in addressing the issue of global ocean health. As Bill talked about, autonomous robotic systems are increasingly important in monitoring our oceans, and that's an area of unique strength that we have. Our efforts have been directed towards space, especially led by our School of Earth and Space Exploration, where we are launching and heading a NASA mission to an asteroid in the asteroid belt named Psyche. But we have, trained scientists, in master's and PhD programs for, exploration systems design and systems networks and sensor networks. So, we very much are the lead of trying to create, novel robotics to explore resilient robotics. And so I think that the ability to team up with BIOS is a great opportunity to then explore our own planet as much as we do explore the solar system. So, this is one of many opportunities for us to, be partners and combine our forces and really, further expand what we can do.
Great, thank you. How does the work that BIOS does fit in with the important research that ASU does on climate adaptation and resiliency? What programs related to sustainability does ASU offer?
Let me start with that. Let's put BIOS and the future ocean and the role of the future ocean in the future world into context. There is clearly a big role that the oceans play in climate or in climate impact. And Bill already mentioned the heat uptake, the uptake of carbon that otherwise would increase the CO2 concentration, the most abundant greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, even more rapidly than it already does. But there are also other elements of the ocean as part of the Earth system as we are looking in the future. For example, if we're looking at transport, about 90% of the goods worldwide in an increasingly globalized world are transported over the ocean. So let's assume we will get sea level rise through climate change, to come back to climate change, by melting ice caps on land. That, if you just take a projection of about 1 meter, which is probably on the conservative side by the end of this century, that creates major problems for the infrastructure, because by definition, the port infrastructure is at sea level. So if you rise that, you will have an issue. If you are going a little bit further and you say, where will we go with energy? We need more renewable energy. A main part of that is solar energy and wind energy. There's quite a bit of offshore wind, which has an impact on the coasts. So we do have to understand the coastal ocean and the transition zone from land to the coast to the deep ocean. On the coastal ocean, we also have the issue of, and actually not just on the coast, in the ocean in general, food supply, fisheries, how sustainable are they? How are they influenced by other activities that we are putting into the coastal area? If we are looking at recreation, big factor for many people. They like to be at the ocean and take in the ocean during their recreation. If we are continuing to pollute the coastal oceans, there will be quite an impact on that. So as you can see, and from the examples that I just listed, and I could go on with many more, this is just a selection of many. The oceans play a major role in how the world will look in the future, not just in climate resiliency, but in many, many aspects of our life. And not just a life along a little strip of land along the coast. It actually has impact on inland too. It has impact on the world as a whole. So from that perspective, it is absolutely necessary that we get a sense, a forward glimpse into how the oceans will evolve and how they will deliver the kind of services that we enjoyed over, over the entire past that we can reconstruct.
Like Kenro, anything to add to that?
So what happens in the rest of the 21st century really depends on this next generation that we're training. They're the ones who are going to be living into this century. And ASU as an institution is absolutely committed as a comprehensive public research university to train this next generation. We have over 150,000 undergraduates and graduate students right now. We are one of the lead institutions for online education, and nearly half of our students are taking our programs online. And so we obviously offer bachelor's, master's, and doctoral programs in sustainability, which integrates and takes a very comprehensive view of all the issues they would have to understand in order to be leaders and taking responsibility for the global health. We also have long-standing strength in environmental life sciences and offer degree programs in conservation biology and ecology, including for the oceans, that are available online. So we can actually, we're reaching a global audience through these programs and not just a regional audience. And so, as Bill talked about earlier, we have National Academy of Science members who are the leads of genomics and evolutionary processes. And so the concept of being able to tell what's happening in the ocean by just sampling some seawater and looking at the DNA that's there is something that's, something that we can definitely, again, BIOS and ASU can combine forces and increasingly take snapshots of the ocean and get scientific sort of discovery that we wouldn't have been able to do by ourselves. So I think there's a lot of potential, and we're very excited on the ASU side about where we could get to in terms of this new partnership.
It's really exciting. Thank you for that. Now, you were all part of the recent Bermuda Climate Summit on May 24th, which was co-hosted by KBRA and the Association of Bermuda Insurers and Reinsurers. One of the highlights outside of participation from BIOS and ASU was a fireside chat with Bermuda's Deputy Premier, Walter Roban, and KBRA's CEO, Jim Nadler, highlighting Bermuda's position as the world's climate finance hub. How does the oceanic research that BIOS and ASU do fit into this messaging?
Pat, I'll try to address that to start. The relationship between BIOS and Bermuda corporations, particularly in the insurance and reinsurance industry, dates back about 30 years. Starting shortly after Hurricane Andrew was such a destructive storm to southern Florida, and it affected the finances of these companies greatly, and they needed to better understand what was controlling the tracking and the intensity of storms, and could they do a better job of understanding their risk in terms of the insurance and the reinsurance risks that they were taking on. And so the island has had a strong relationship between the scientific activities and the corporate application of that understanding that goes back about 30 years. Bermuda is also a particularly well-regulated commercial opportunity for companies. It is willing to take on new opportunities, climate finance risk being one of them. I think it has the type of experience based upon what it's done in the reinsurance industry to be able to become a center for climate risk that goes beyond just insurance, but in financial investments, corporate risks, stranded assets, all sorts of things that various corporations are going to be facing over this coming rest of the century and beyond. So I do think that that the current government, represented by Deputy Premier Roban, is very, very interested in making this work well. And the Bermuda Business Development Agency is likewise strongly supporting this as the next major focus for financial corporate activity on the island. So I think that there's a tremendous opportunity here. We've got both the science. Now with ASU involved, we have much better possibilities for future resilience and sustainability activities that BIOS alone never could have done. So I think that the future looks bright for these opportunities.
Pat, just building on the great account that Bill just gave about the history in the present state, if we are looking where the world is heading, And just looking at risk, we know from reports by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we will see more extremes, stronger extremes. So more than ever, we will need a strong insight into how insurance and reinsurance will work in these instances. For example, Bill, in his initial remarks, mentioned that hurricanes pick up their energy from the surface water, from the heat that's in the surface layer. Well, the water is getting warmer and there is more energy to be harvested, and the hurricanes actually do that. We see hurricanes that are larger. We also see new phenomena such as stalling hurricanes that are really loaded with a lot of water vapor that leads to strong and extended precipitation events that pose new kinds of risks, and especially in their quantity, maybe not so much in the quality. So looking ahead and building upon what is already being done there, there's probably an even greater need of a well-established and highly adaptive insurance and reassurance industry. But as Bill also mentioned, it's going beyond insurance. There are so many issues that we have to deal with in terms of what will the infrastructure look, what kind of financing, how do we actually combat some of the impact of climate change that we already see. And Bermuda is well positioned, and we are all looking forward to working with BIOS, with the government of Bermuda, with the insurance and reinsurance companies on Bermuda to make the best out of that situation and to be in a position to meet the challenges that no doubt are growing, and we are experiencing them right now, and they will continue to grow.
Thank you, Peter. One last question. Were there any other favorite takeaways from the Bermuda Climate Summit for you guys?
So I was quite, I had a lot of great conversations with reinsurance and insurance colleagues at that meeting. I mean, what struck me is that, Bermuda and the industry are very nimble, and change is the word, right? I mean, thinking about change, adapting to change, and anticipating change and modeling change. And ASU is also all about change. We know that we're in a very dynamic era. That how do we train the next generation for that? How do we carry out impactful research in this period of change? And so I think there was a great commonality of the way we think about what changes are happening. And that was very refreshing and I think very promising in terms of course, BIOS also very much studying what is happening to the North Atlantic and the planet as a whole, and how we can bring together disciplines and whether ranging from economics and finance to oceanography and planetary sciences to bear to study these questions. So I think it was a great opportunity to talk to people from a number of different disciplines and hear about the types of models and the types of plans that they have in place.
So Pat, from my perspective, it was another great example how increasingly the private sector is actually taking a major role in shaping our future. And in part, that of course has to happen anyway, because it is a big part of society. But in part, the private sector right now has to fill in for some of the quote unquote failures of some of the governments who are not playing the kind of role that they did in the past and that one should expect they be playing. But some governments, and that includes the US, but it's not only the US, you can look at Europe, Asia, you can look anywhere, too hung up with other issues and sometimes also polarized in terms of their opinions, especially when it comes to environmental issues. So they are almost paralyzed over the topics of legislature that protects the environment, that protects the Earth system as a whole. So seeing how well positioned the private sector is and how willing they are to engage further was one of the major takeaways for me and one of the very positive outcomes, in my view, of the summit.
Great.
Thank you to Pat, Bill, Peter, and Kenro for a very interesting discussion. This concludes our episode. New episodes of ESG Talks air every other week. In the meantime, please visit kbra.com to access our other podcast series, as well as our ratings and our research.